For the past year, the media has faced a sustained and difficult test. How do we accurately report the risks of the pandemic while also providing perspective and nuance? It's a challenge that came to the fore this week when the U.S. government pressed pause on the one-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That story was ripe for sensationalism, but Adam Riley says overall, the press did a pretty good job.
When the Johnson & Johnson story broke, CBS This Morning's David Agus tried to point out that frightening side effects from the vaccine are very rare. Gayle King wasn't having it.
I'd be a little freaked out right now if I had gotten J&J. Yeah, but I know you keep saying that, and all the experts say it's extremely rare, but we keep hearing these drumbeat of stories about J&J.
That exchange backed up the fears of media critic Matt Gertz, who called the J&J story an incredibly crucial, high-stakes test for the press. But as it turned out, other outlets were determined to put the risks in context while also taking them seriously.
Extremely rare reports of 6 women who suffered severe blood clots. One died, another in the hospital.
I really want to reinforce this, that these are very, very rare events.
What's more, they emphasized that the J&J story shouldn't become an excuse not to get vaccinated at all.
Are you concerned at all, though, that people are going to see this and say, well, you know, I've been nervous about getting a vaccine. This justifies my anxiety.
The risk-benefit ratio is way in favor of benefit.
A point that eluded Fox News' Tucker Carlson, who claimed the J&J rollback suggests a vast but vague pro-vaccine conspiracy.
Because this one vaccine has hurt 6 people out of 7 million, we need to stop using it immediately. Does that make sense to you? No, it really doesn't. It seems possible there may be more going on here.
Of course, Fox News will be Fox News. On the whole, the media did pretty well with a topic that's complicated and has very high stakes.
Well, Callie, you know as a former medical correspondent that risk is one of those, unknowns that you have to take into consideration in every single procedure or new medication that's developed, anything like that. And it's the media's job to put it into perspective, as basically everybody said in that piece. But with something like the coronavirus and with Europe putting this thing on pause and with 9 people here, but worldwide there could be many more, some that we don't even know about. I mean, I think they're doing the right thing, but it is minuscule nonetheless. They probably did the right thing.
Oh, I think the coverage has been overall, I would have to agree with Adam's report, very, very good. What I would say is the only thing that this is a nitpick, it probably can be an important one. It took about the 2nd or 3rd day before I got clarity that the clots were not the same as the regular blood clots that you hear about, and that platelets were involved. Now, okay, that's going down a wonky hole, but that was important in terms of the response of the vaccine. That was at the crux of this. So you can't treat it the same way. That's an important piece of information. So people couldn't go out and go take a blood thinner if they thought they were going to get the clot. Mm-hmm. See, that needed to be said. But other than that, I thought pretty much we did pretty well in covering this.
I agree. For the most part, the mainstream media have done a good job on this. But, we really have to go to the Murdoch press, which is incredibly influential. In addition to what Adam reported about what Tucker Carlson said, Carlson also said this week that the fact that they're asking us to wear masks after we're vaccinated may mean that the vaccines don't work at all, and they don't want to tell us. There's also been a couple of headlines just today in Murdoch's New York Post. One of them was about a young man who died after receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And then if you burrow deep into the story, you see that it may have had absolutely nothing to do with the vaccine. So, for the most part, the media have done well, but this is something that it doesn't take much to get people scared. And I also wonder if no matter how responsible the media have been, whether many people are going to be reluctant to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine anyway.
Exactly.
I do think that everyone has been quite, responsible in the coverage of this story. But where I find some issues typically, this is where it typically happens around the teasers, right? The things that you see media outlets put out on social media, the lead-in to a story, the teaser for the newscast coming up in the evening. those are the breaking stories of the day, and so they're played up in promotions. And oftentimes, that's all that the public really sees. That's all that they digest. They don't sit there and wait around sometimes for the story, or they go into that story thinking based on what they heard in the tease. And so I think, it's not only our role to be responsible in the actual stories that we do and how those stories or the interviews that are done on air with the experts, but also we should think about how our stories are being promoted and how the stories play out across social media.
Yeah, I like Callie made a good point about how sometimes the media stumbles when it comes to science stories because there's a lack of expertise. We're lucky at WBZ, we have Dr. Malika Marshall right there. Boom, we put her on the air, she puts it in context. There's really no excuse. I mean, it's a perfect made-for-TV graphic. What are your chances of getting blood clots from the J&J vaccine? Well, they are about 100 times less than getting struck by lightning, hit by a runaway ocean liner. You could almost have fun with it and do splashy graphics. Tucker Carlson is a garbage peddler. If it weren't him, it'd be other recesses of the web that would be peddling fear. But the legit media also tends to go a little bit heavy on the fear mongering. Not so much necessarily on this story, but on others. And you wonder if some of that sort of vestigial reflex of, oh, this is scary, let's make sure our viewers are good and scared, comes to the surface at times.
Well, except, Callie, as you remember, J&J was a little bit controversial in the beginning because its efficacy wasn't quite as good, or it was minuscule, but it was less than the others. And people in the minority community were afraid that they were going to give in that because they were going to make that more accessible. Right. So it sort of feeds into that paranoia. And how does the press kind of tamp that down at the same time say, no, this is a real concern for everybody?
But the point there was, the answer was, but it was 100% effective from keeping you out of the hospital and dying. And that should have been the headline. So,
true. Yeah. That's true.